Hey guys, so today I wanted to show you my favorite and least favorite shade in each of my high-end eyeshadow palettes. I will have a drugstore version of this video coming up soon as well. I wanted to break it into two just because I feel like the video would end up being too long if I did all my palettes in one. I recently saw Lauren Mae Beauty do a video like this, and I had so much fun watching that video that I was like, I'm gonna film it myself. So I think I actually did this video like 2 or 3 years ago on my channel. I think this video topic was going around on YouTube for a little while, and I remember doing it way back then, but I feel like I'm definitely due for an updated version. So I'll leave Lauren's video linked down below. I love her channel. She's very talented, does a lot of fun makeup looks, and also focuses a lot on kind of like the mindful makeup consumption type of content. So I'll leave her link down below. I'm sure many of you already know her, but if you don't, you should definitely check her out. I'm gonna start with the one that I have sitting right in front of me. This is my current 1 month 1 palette, and it's the Anastasia Norvina palette. So I've really gotten to know this palette very well this month, and I think I've decided that my favorite shade in here is actually the shade Rose Gold. So this is not your typical rose gold. It's more of like a rosy mauve color. There's really not a whole lot of gold to it, so I'm not sure why they call it rose gold, but I love it. I would almost describe this as a duochrome shadow because the base of this is almost like a grayish taupe. Really different. I don't think I have any other shades in my collection quite like this one. And I love this shadow just all over my lid. It's just so sultry and dimensional, and it's just my kind of color. Most of these top shadows are stunning. I actually, if you'd asked me like maybe a few months ago, I probably would have said Dazzling is my favorite shade because I love that one too. But I think I just used Rose Gold again the other day, and I think that one has taken the #1 spot for me now. My least favorite shade in this palette is actually the shade Drama. I just feel like I would prefer like a deep matte purple. But a lot of times I find that deep shimmers like this, they often make the base just kind of black. And it's not that it's not pigmented, but I feel like once you blend this type of a shade out, it just looks dark and murky and you don't even really see the purple. It's not a bad shadow, like I've definitely seen worse, but it's just kind of one of my pet peeves with eyeshadows. It's like the base of this is like a blackish brown. I feel like it would have just been way more useful as a matte purple. But I love this palette. I think this is the best ABH palette that I've tried. And I think it's wildly underrated. All right, the palette that I mainly have on my eyes today is actually ABH Soft Glam, so we'll go ahead and do this one now too. I'm torn on my favorite shade. I really am. But I think I'm gonna have to say my favorite shade is this shade right here, which is Glistening. This is the one shade in this palette that I have hit pan on. And it kind of just looks like an unassuming shade in the pan. It just looks like any other soft, like champagne color. But it's very dimensional. There's just something special about it. It's got like a rosy shift to it, very subtle. It is a much softer, more pearly shimmer than a lot of the ones in Norvina. It's just stunning. I don't even know if like the camera's gonna do it justice, but I just love that shade. There's definitely a reason why I've hit pan on that. I was thinking I would say that Rose Pink is my favorite shade. That's actually the shade that I have on my lids today. But I almost kind of wish that this one was a little bit more foiled, you know? So I'm gonna go with Glistening. That's just such a beautiful, soft lid shade. One thing that Lauren said in her video that's kind of how I'm thinking about this too, is like her least favorite shade was maybe the shade that she would take out of the palette if she had the choice, or the shade that she might replace with a different shade. I'm thinking my least favorite shade is gonna be Rustic here. I mean, it's just a medium brown. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but I just feel like I could do without one of these medium browns, because you've got like a lighter, warmer one, a more reddish one, and then a nice deep chocolate brown, but I just don't really feel like we need another sort of medium brown like that. So I'm gonna say that's my least favorite. Again, there's nothing wrong with it, and I use it. It's not like I can't use it, but I mean, it swatches nicely. There's nothing wrong with it. I feel bad even picking that as my least favorite shade, but I think I would prefer to have that shade replaced with maybe another shimmer. I think that would make me like this palette even more. But if you like a lot of matte browns, then that might be a plus to you. So while we're on Anastasia, I'll go ahead and just do my other two. So this next one is Subculture. Really fun, rich palette, very grungy. All right, my least favorite shade I can already tell you is the shade Destiny, and that's just because this shade does not look good on my skin tone. I think I used this once last year and I actually didn't mind it, but it's tricky for me, and I think this type of shade looks really pretty on some people, especially if you have like a tanner or like deeper skin tone. But on me, it's kind of like a pukey green, you know? Especially like you can see, it's not even that green looking once I swatch it. And again, I think on some skin tones it might look more green than on mine, but it's not the most flattering for me. Although I can appreciate it, like in the pan, I think it looks pretty. It's just in practice, it's not always the cutest. My favorite shade, I think I'm actually gonna go with a matte for my favorite shade. I'm gonna go with Axis. This is just such a rich teal, and I'm a sucker for really rich colors. And I mean, the mattes in this palette are so pigmented, like you gotta give it that. They can be a little bit tricky because they almost behave like pressed pigments, but I mean, look at that. Isn't that gorgeous? I feel like I just don't have another teal quite like that in my collection. So yeah, that's really fun. Making me want to reach into this palette again soon. I love this palette in the fall, so I think I'm going to be having some fun with it maybe in the next month or so. But you know what? I also really like Roxy, which is this like bright peach color. I like that one too. So I just think that Axis is something a little bit different, a little bit special. All right, so the next palette is Sultry. This is my newest ABH palette. I bought it when it was on sale this past holiday season. And, oh, this is gonna be hard. I don't know if I have a least favorite shade in this palette. My favorite shade though is Cyborg. That's this silver, but it's not just any silver. It's very foiled and it's almost a little bit rosy. Like there's a little bit of a rosiness to it that just makes it kind of special. Isn't that beautiful, just the way that that shifts in the light? So pretty. My least favorite shade, do I have to pick? I don't know. Like, I do really like this palette. I feel like I'm going to be using it a lot in the winter. Maybe my least favorite shade is Ember. Ember is this shade right here. It's kind of like an olivey taupe. Maybe, I mean, really just a personal preference. I feel like of all the shades in here, this is probably the one I've used the least. I feel like I would enjoy this though, like for a specific type of look. It's just not one of my like go-to colors. It's just a little bit too like grungy olivey taupe for me, but that's not to say it's a bad shade, and it still is really nice and pigmented. So, but yeah, there's really not a dud shade in this palette. I think they're all really, really stunning. So those are all of my Anastasia palettes. Let's do Urban Decay next. Let's start with Stoned Vibes, which is one of my favorite palettes. All right, I know my favorite shade in here, and it is the shade Tiger's Eye. This shade is just so special. I mean, if you look at it, a lot of these shimmers, they're kind of like marbly shimmers. It's just this very wet looking rose gold. It kind of looks gold at first glance, but then if you look at the way it shifts in the light, there is this beautiful like pinky color in there too. There's some like little flecks of like a champagne shade in there. So I just think that's so beautiful. And the way that these shimmers are formulated, they've got just this sort of translucent, like scattered glitter effect to them. It's so pretty. Again, I don't think the camera's going to do it justice, but let me try to show you. See how it just shifts? It's just stunning. So that is my favorite shade in there. And then I think I'm going to say my least favorite shade in here is actually Raw Energy. It's another one of the shimmers. Don't get me wrong, I do think it's a really pretty color, but I feel like it just doesn't have quite as much of like that really pretty scattered sparkle that some of these other shades have. It's like a little bit more dull than some of these other shades. I feel like I kind of have to like dig my finger in there. Whereas with the other shimmers, I just get more like immediate foiled payoff. Although, I mean, it swatched really beautifully. That's that one right there. I don't know, it just comes off a little bit lighter and a little bit more dull than it looks in the pan. And I think that's kind of, especially because all the other shimmers in here, I feel like really show up super vibrant, and that one, it's just, I kind of have to build it up a little bit more than the others, so that's why it's my least favorite, but I mean, it's still a beautiful shade. So that's Raw Energy, my least favorite, and that's Tiger's Eye, my favorite. So let's do Naked Wild West now. I actually like this palette. I have a 3 looks 1 palette on this if you want to check it out. I think there's a lot of nice variety in here. I haven't been reaching for it a ton like in the spring and summer, but I do think I'm going to feel a lot more inspired to reach for this in the fall. And I really don't feel like there's any shades that really stand out to me as my favorite or my least favorite. I mean, I feel like all of these shades make sense in the palette, and there's not really any particular shade that I would take out. I will say I'm not in love with the Urban Decay shimmer formula that's in their Naked palettes. I love the ones in Stoned Vibes, but I feel like these could offer a little bit more. They're kind of just straight shimmers. None of them are really like duochromes. I am really curious about the new Urban Decay Naked Cyber palette. I think we've only seen like one almost like teaser photo so far, and it's really hard to tell what the shades look like, but a lot of them do look like duochromes, and I'm really excited to see swatches of that because I just feel like they need to do something different with the shimmers in their Naked palettes because they're just kind of, they're a little blah. So I'm gonna say my least favorite shade is the shade Bud, which is this kind of turquoise shimmer here. It's a really pretty shade. I just kind of wish that it was a little bit prettier. Like it's not shifty at all. It's just kind of like a straight turquoise. It is a little, actually all of the shimmers in here are a little bit like flaky, and that's another thing I don't love about them. But despite that, you can still get a really beautiful look. So, I mean, it was really hard to pick a least favorite shade, but I think that's gonna be my least favorite. And my favorite shade, you know what? I think I'm actually gonna say, I do feel like the mattes in here are really, really nice. I'm gonna say my favorite shade in the palette is actually Laredo, which is this, it looks super boring. It's like, why is that your favorite? It's kind of just this medium taupe, and I just find that shade really useful. I don't feel like I have very many shades quite like that in my collection. It's cool toned, but it still blends into my skin really nicely. I feel like a lot of kind of cool toned mattes can look a little unnatural, but this one is just perfect. Whenever I do want to go cool tone with this palette, because you can kind of go both warm or cool, but whenever I go cool, I really like to wear that in my crease because I just feel like you can't really mess it up. It's a really nice shade. Seems boring, but that's my favorite, that's my least favorite. So next, we have a sad one because this one is no longer sold. They did reformulate this palette and they only kept 3 of the original shades. This is the Athr Beauty Rose Quartz palette. Now, the more pictures and videos I've seen of the new palette, the more I do think it looks prettier than I originally thought, but I still am kind of salty at them for changing it because it was already so perfect, and they got rid of a lot of these really like special duochrome shades in the center. So, you know, I'll be okay, I'll survive, but this is just such a beautiful palette. So it's really hard to pick a favorite shade. Actually, no, it's not. Okay, my favorite shade is gonna have to be Reawakening, which is one of the middle shades. It's a beautiful duochrome. It's like a rose gold, but a very fiery rose gold. Like the gold is a very yellow gold and the rose is a very like reddish rose. So it's a more intense rose gold than what you're probably used to seeing. It's kind of similar to that Tiger's Eye shade from Stoned Vibes. And this is a shade that looks really amazing over the NYX glitter primer. But I mean, even on its own, look at that. Like, I'm just a little annoyed that this is not included in the new version of this palette because, I mean, that's just such a beautiful shade. They had such a good thing going on, you know? All right, I think I'm gonna say my least favorite shade is actually another one of those middle shades. It's this bottom one here called Astarte, or Astarte, I think is how it's pronounced. It's pretty. I just kind of wish that it had more to offer. These 2 duochromes, the rose gold and like the purpley one, are very, very shifty. And then this one is just kind of dull. There's not much of a shift to it. It's kind of like a bluey gunmetal, but I mean, you'll see in the swatch. And don't get me wrong, I do like the shade, but I just think it could have been even more, like, there could have been even more oomph to it. There's that one. See, I mean, I really built it up there so you can see how it looks when you do build it up. And then over the NYX glitter primer, of course, it is also beautiful. I don't know. It's very hard to pick a least favorite shade because I really love all the shades in here. I do feel like each shade was very intentionally chosen. I just think that that one maybe could have been a little bit more interesting. Now that I'm looking at it swatched though, I'm like, oh no, it is really pretty though. This is hard. This is one of my favorite palettes in my entire collection. I just think it is stunning. If you like kind of desaturated, cool toned neutrals, if you're like kind of near my skin tone, this is one of those palettes that you just can't mess up, and the shades work so well together. It's a very harmonious palette, you know? If you have it, you know, I'm sure you know what I mean. Now I feel bad picking that as my least favorite because it's so pretty. Can we just not pick a least favorite? My last three high-end palettes are all indie brand palettes. Let's start with my Clarity Cosmetics So Mermazing palette. This is a pretty palette, isn't it? I mean, just stunning. If you like pastels, it is beautiful. I think I'm gonna have to say my favorite shade in this palette is the shade Beach Please. Beautiful duochrome, and it really shows up true to the color that you see in the pan. It's almost a multi-chrome because it's kind of got this like seafoam green base, and then in one direction it shifts pink, and then in another direction it shifts gold, or like a yellowy gold. So very, very pretty. I don't even know if duochrome is an accurate way to describe that shade, but oh, how pretty is that? I think my least favorite shade is going to be the shade Fintastic, this pastel yellow. This shade is just such a true pastel. It's so desaturated that it's almost the same depth as my skin tone. So it's kind of hard to get this to really show up. I think I just wish that it were a little bit more saturated and more yellow. I also have a 3 Looks 1 palette on this palette, by the way, if you want to check that out too. But both of these mattes, the peach and the yellow especially, are just a little bit chalky, a little bit kind of skippy on the eyes. Like you can build them up, but then they almost look a little dry. So they're just a little tricky. But you can see the way it swatches, it almost just doesn't even look yellow once I have it on my skin. It almost just looks like kind of a cream color, you know? And I do love yellow eyeshadow. I just think this is a little bit too light for me. But overall, I do really enjoy this palette. It helps to use like the NYX Jumbo Pencil in Milk as a base underneath some of those mattes, especially the really light mattes, because it just helps them pop a little bit more. And it also helps to use a dense brush with them. But overall, I think it's a really pretty palette, especially if you like duochromes. Like I feel like those duochromes make the price of the palette worth it. All right, next for the Shared Planet Polar Bear palette. This is such a beautiful wintry palette, such a fun color story. I'm gonna say I already know my favorite shade in the palette, and it is Avalanche. This is such a unique color. It kind of just looks like any other icy blue, but this is such a nice duochrome shadow. It's got this kind of like dusty gray base, and then it's definitely sort of like an aqua icy blue, but then it shifts to like this lavender color. It's so unique, so pretty. I don't have anything else like that. I love wearing that all over my lid with like the gray in the crease. Love that, especially for the winter time. Let's see, my least favorite shade. Honestly, I think I'm gonna say my least favorite shade is Aurora here. It's like this sort of berry mauve color. I just feel like it's a little out of place in this palette. Like this palette really gets me in the mood for cool tones, and then there's just this kind of random berry color in there. It's not a bad color, but I just don't really pair that color with a lot of the other colors in here. I mean, it's pretty for certain wintry looks, but I don't always think that like this type of berry mauve is the most flattering on me. And it's also not nearly as like shiny as some of those other shimmers in there. It's just a little dull, so I think that's probably going to be my least favorite shade. All right, last we have the Billie Beauty Eyes of India palette. This is such a beautiful one. Beautiful jewel tones in here. My favorite shade in this palette is actually, I think it's a matte, surprisingly. Usually my favorite is a shimmer, but as we've seen with some of these, sometimes my favorite is a matte. So my favorite is actually Mehendi here. This is like a rich red orange, or kind of like a burnt orange, I guess. I love this shade in the fall. When I'm like in the mood for a really rich, warm-toned look, I just think that shade is so stunning, especially paired with like the gold in here and then that other like lighter matte orange. I love that combo, but I don't know, there's something about like a rich red like that, or like reddish brown, that I just think is so beautiful. My least favorite shade in here is gonna have to be Rani. I'm just not big on like deep violets like that. And the downside of this palette that does kind of keep me from reaching for it more often is that you do have to use a wet brush with these 3 shades down here, and I just kind of wish that you could just use them as is and not have to wet the brush. But so you'll see it's not going to swatch as well as a regular shadow would because I'm not swatching it with a wet brush. Yeah, see, that's how it swatches. which just shows like that's how it would look without a wet brush. But you know, it's just kind of a dull purple, not really my kind of shade, but I love all the other shades in here, so I don't mind it too much. And I could definitely see that shade being useful for some people. So those are all of my high-end palettes and my favorite and least favorite shade in each one. For some of these, this was really hard. For others, it was pretty easy to pick. So this was a lot of fun to film. It's just kind of a fun and different way to analyze your palettes. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and definitely stay tuned for the drugstore version of this one. But if you enjoyed this video, definitely make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you've not already. I'd love to see you again very soon, and hopefully I'll talk to you in my next video. Bye!